Protesters clashed outside the Lynx game this afternoon after Indiana Fever player Sophie Cunningham's comments regarding biological men playing in women's sports.
And this comes after multiple protests in other cities hosting Fever games. Fox 9's Emily Pofall joining us now. And so, Emily, some of that back and forth took place inside the arena today, too.
Right. This all stems from a July interview with Cunningham where she says she wants to protect young girls in a locker room or young girls in sport playing against, quote, biological men. Lynx coach Cheryl Reeve, after practice yesterday, said trans women should be included, too.
It is not the case that we have, quote, biological men in girls' locker rooms. The way it's being phrased, the innuendo there that somehow transgender women are predators of some kind in the locker room. There's a lot of narrative that is problematic that we need to address. That is simply not what's happening.
She went on to call attention to other issues impacting women's sports.
Whether it's, cisgender men that have held us down for years in spaces like being able to have access to facilities and uniforms and locker rooms, all the things that these young girls that are sitting at games with anti-trans signs, do they understand actually what their real problems are?
Then today, dozens of Cunningham supporters, some from out of town, clashed with trans advocates outside the arena. Similar scenes recently played out at Fever games in Seattle and Portland. But then take a look at this. Inside Target Center, Cunningham and Reeve were seen having a cordial mid-court conversation before the game. Reeve seen wearing a shirt saying trans kids belong. And Reeve post-game wouldn't share exactly what they said to each other, but she did seem to encourage polite, nuanced conversation.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So the Indiana Fever were up against Minnesota and they ended up losing. And there were some interesting things that took place during the game, things that people noticed. So we know by now Sophie Cunningham has been vocal about the importance of protecting girls and women's sports. And of course, there were those who are not happy about it. She has doubled down on her assertion that, women's sports need to be protected. But there were others within the Fever who refused to answer the question, refused to engage in a conversation.
I think there's always going to be outside noise, but I think we've been professionals long enough to know that if you let that affect you, then you're not really here for the right things. And so for us, we just keep the main thing, and that's hoops.
You're speaking of that outside noise, Sophie, your teammate. Sophie came out with
Oh, thank you. Have a good day. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
And Caitlin Clark was asked recently about her stance on men competing in women's sports. And there were people who were very disappointed by her answer.
I think for us, it's not really a discussion we really have in our locker room. I think it's for leagues and the governing bodies to work with their athletes to find solutions, but our focus is on basketball, and that's what we talk about and how we can get wins, and obviously we didn't do that tonight, so we need to find an area to improve in that way.
Do you have any, reaction to the...
I just answered for you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll go over to the Zoom. We'll start with Chloe.
The coach, Stephanie White, was asked and said that she's not educated enough on the matter. And there were some other people who weighed into it.
What's your stance on athletes who are biologically male participating in women's sports?
Yeah, my focus as a basketball coach, be completely honest, I don't think I've ever had to think about that. I'm completely supportive of people from all communities, all walks of life. So that's my stance completely. I'm supportive of everyone in the Portland, the community.
Would you be okay with biological males participating in the WNBA?
I think I've given my answer already on that question. I don't feel like I need to go deeper there.
The last time I know you don't have the Fever again in the regular season, but coming out of the break, one of the big news stories has been Sophie Cunningham and the protests for her and protests against her. And, they had a national televised game today and Cheryl, wore a shirt, and it's just a conversation. I'm wondering what do you think about it? Do you think that's good for the league? Does it detract from the basketball? Is it just noise? I'm just wondering what your opinion is.
I think, thank you for that question. I think just in terms of how I'm seeing it is, if I could answer with for me, sports is about belonging. It's about inclusivity. It's about allowing everyone to be their authentic self. I'm big on that just because I have been criticized for my height, for my ethnicity. I've been in those "you shouldn't belong here" many times. And for me, I don't want that space, especially Golden State, to ever feel like that. So I'm all about women, little girls deserving to play, and that includes trans women. So I'm all about inclusivity.
One thing that people noticed was that the coach for Minnesota just happened to be wearing a "Trans Kids Belong" t-shirt. And people are saying that this was a direct dig towards Sophie Cunningham. And, they are reporting, these media outlets are using rhetoric that depicts Sophie as a bigot. You never see them saying that Sophie is pro-woman, pro-girls and sports, that sort of thing. No, it's anti-trans, anti-this, anti-that. When the reality is she simply said that girls' sports should be protected, that girls should have their own category to compete in, that girls should be afforded everything that Title IX is supposed to afford them. That's all. And this is an issue that the majority, and I can say that very confidently, the majority of people in this country agree on. They say it's an 80-20 issue. I believe it's even a more favourable ratio than that. What she said, it really wasn't controversial. In a sane world where people are reasonable, it wouldn't be considered controversial. Riley Gaines attended the game along with Jennifer Sey, two women's rights activists, very vocal on the importance of women having their own sports, former athletes, and they attended the game and took a photo with Sophie Cunningham. So Sophie Cunningham is not, backing down in any way. She's now being photographed with Riley Gaines. That's a very clear message. She's not trying to straddle the fence. It's very clear on where she stands. She has said that she's not political, and, she's just speaking up for women and girls. And that is very much something to be celebrated, something to be commended. But Riley Gaines reported that during the game, she was told that her sign was offensive or that she wasn't allowed to show it. All her sign said was "Thank you, Sophie," from a girl mum. According to Riley, she was told not to display the sign. How ridiculous. And there were a lot of signs, anti-Sophie Cunningham signs, saying, "We don't like you. Just when we thought we didn't like Caitlin Clark, you came along." Something like that, like ridiculous signs. Offensive signs towards Sophie Cunningham. And, to my knowledge, they weren't asked to take those signs down.
And they tried to make you take away your sign. But you said, no, not going to happen.
Yeah, Sean, I could have assumed that the league or someone affiliated with the league would not have wanted me to have that sign there. So I was very careful going into the game. I looked up all of the rules. I knew it had to be on an 11 by 17-inch piece of paper or poster board. I left no derogatory comment, nothing negative, nothing political. My sign said, "Sophie, comma, thank you." Signed, a girl mom. A lot kinder than a lot of the signs that I saw in there, I'll tell you that. Someone from across the court, I'm assuming it was someone who was maybe a security person affiliated. He was very obviously with either the Target Center or the WNBA. He looks at me, he says, "Put that sign down." And I'm looking around, there's like 1,000 signs beside me. And so I keep holding, and he comes over there, he says, "You can't have your sign." I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, it has her name on it." I said, "I can't have this sign because it has Sophie's name on it." He said, that's right, you can't. It shows you that the league very clearly has an agenda that they are trying to purport that is not representative of reality at all. The only people that the Lynx or whoever was in charge of the camera put on the Jumbotron were people who were draped in their pride flags and their trans flags, who had their trans signs, some of those wearing those shirts that says "Protect Trans Kids" or "Protect Trans Lives," that have a literal knife on it, an object that is used and intended for violence. And then you have Cheryl Reeves, the coach, wearing a shirt that says "Trans Kids Belong." They say that Sophie has aligned herself politically conservative because she has stood by the slogan of "Protect Women's Sports." That's it, nothing more, nothing less. If Protect Women's Sports is deemed political, like they say, then so is Trans Kids Belong. The league often says they have a problem with people like Sophie bringing politics into sports. The league doesn't have a problem with politics in sports. They have a problem with conservative politics in sports. And I will tell you, Sean, every time Sophie was on the court, every time she was subbed in, every time she threw up the ball, she was booed by the entire stadium virtually, bar me and Jen Sey, who is sitting next to me, owner of XXXY Athletics.
So Cheryl Reeve was asked about a conversation she appeared to be having with Sophie Cunningham before the match.
How important is it to have those like in-person conversations with people that have different views?
I think it's great. You know, I think both of us understand that we, you know, we have platforms, and, you know, we both talked about, you know, wanting to, more than anything, educate, and there are some things that, you know, we have in common and maybe some things you differ on, just like any issues. And I think it's how you handle things. And so, you know, it was nice to be in person, for sure.
She was asked about the pro-women rally that was going on outside these games, the pro-Sophie Cunningham rallies.
I think it would, you know, it would make sense for our league to be leaders in this space. And there's again, I don't want to go so detailed. There's a lot of nuanced issues when it comes to science and hormone therapy, et cetera. I've chosen to educate myself about the space. I've chosen to listen to transgender families, and what I know is exclusion is not the answer. And we've got to find the common ground and be inclusive. That's a space, I think, if we all come from that. I also think like I said, the issue isn't as big as the issues that we have in women's sports. You know, whether it's, you know, cisgender men that have held us down for years in spaces like being able to have access to facilities and uniforms and locker rooms, all the things that these young girls that are sitting at games with anti-trans signs, do they understand actually what the real problems are and how they're being marginalized? We're still not in a space where we have equality.
And I like how these people act like they're all reasonable and all rational, when the fact is they're anything but. You are calling T-shirts that simply say XXXY anti-trans. You've got to be kidding me. They were wearing XXXY. That was not anti-trans. That is saying that we have categories in sports and those categories need to be protected and celebrated. It's the categories that allow equality in sport.
Became a man's job. And so to this day, we still don't have more women coaching in college basketball than we do men.
It's ridiculous to say, you know, women's rights and all of this, but turn a blind eye when women are being excluded from their own sports. And then to say there are bigger issues, tell that to the high school girl who had her state championship taken away from her. These people lack compassion. They refuse to see it from the point of view of the girl who has been disenfranchised in her own sport. They refuse to see it from the perspective of the girls. They've only seen it through the lens of their ideology. And to say that, you know, oh, they're not coming into the locker rooms. Boys are allowed into girls' locker rooms as long as there are policies that say you can identify yourself into that locker room. As long as gender identity takes precedence over biological sex, that's exactly what is happening. The girls who had to share a locker room with Leah Thomas were exposed to male genitalia. This is happening. We have girls in locker rooms with grown men because of gender identity. It's not even just about sports, because that is simply used to open the door to any man to enter into the girls' locker room, to strip girls of the basic protection that they are entitled to when they're at school, when they're at the leisure centre, when they're competing in sports. Gender identity strips basic protections away from girls. And then on top of that, these girls are told that they're not even allowed to object. That is bigotry to object. We've seen plenty of examples of this. So these people are being obtuse. They are playing dumb, despite knowing what is going on, or refusing to learn about the reality of what is going on. Speak to the high school girls. Speak to the girls who are protesting outside of these games or rallying for Sophie Cunningham. Speak to them. Many of them are made up of girls who had to compete against boys in order to compete in sports.
In 8th grade, I think it was May 2024. I was running the 1600 and I had won every race up until then. And we were lining up. We finished our race. I placed second and I went to stand on the podium and I saw a lot of people down below kind of angry. And as I got off the podium, I was later informed that the person who had won was actually a biological male. So I kind of got thrown into this whole thing unknowingly. After that, I've competed against 4 other biological males. I'm going to junior year now.
They ended up competing against boys. They didn't ask for any of this. They certainly didn't consent to any of it. They showed up to compete and there was a boy in their category. One of their opponents turned out to be a boy. And on top of that, they're told that they're not allowed to object to that boy being in their locker room. So I love how these people are acting like they're all rational and, oh, we're open to conversation. No, you're not. No, you're not. Wearing that T-shirt, how inappropriate was that, in my opinion? Very inappropriate for a coach, a basketball coach, a woman's basketball coach to be wearing that. It's just ridiculous.
Why do they do it? Why would you go after children? Childhood gender dysphoria is a transient developmental phenomenon. It's not a fixed identity. So what is behind the idea of trying to fix it? It's because the intervention actually perpetuates it. It creates a higher persistence of the dysphoria. People don't talk about this. Why do you think it bothered me so much when they talked about pronouns or having kids change clothes in the where boys dressed up as girls in Drag Queen Story Hour, or even the name changes? And why did I find that deeply immoral? Because it created a higher persistence of the dysphoria. It was a self-reinforcement, and it warped the natural development of a child. That woman wearing that shirt has no idea what she's talking about. This isn't Bigfoot. This isn't wearing a Loch Ness Monster T-shirt where it's fake and it doesn't hurt anybody. That actually destroys lives. She's an idiot and she's a coward.
No kid thinks they're in the wrong body unless an adult has told them that or sown the seed of doubt in their mind. Kids don't even have a concept of that.
I think it's for leagues and the governing bodies to work with their athletes to find solutions, but our focus is on basketball, and that's what we talk about and how we can get wins, and obviously we didn't do that tonight, so need to find an area to improve in that way.
No, I do feel for Caitlin in the sense that she doesn't want to be asked these questions. She really doesn't. It puts her on the spot and she's very uncomfortable with it, clearly, because in her mind it's weighing into politics. And I don't think this is a political issue. I think, saying that girls should be protected in their locker rooms and in their sports, I don't think that's a political issue. I think that's a moral issue, an issue of right and wrong. But in her mind, at the moment she answers a certain way, she's weighing into politics, and she definitely doesn't want to do that. She's made it clear that she's not here for that. So her answer was disappointing to me personally. It was disappointing, but I understand that she doesn't want to be dragged into this. And, at the same time, I respect that she's being true to herself as somebody who's decided, I'm not going to be dragged into any of this. Fair enough. I do think it comes across cold to the young high school girls, even middle school girls who've had to compete against boys. There's a disconnect there. It's not just about the WNBA. It's about the fact that girls all across this country have had to deal with this. That Title IX affords them equal opportunities in sports. And when you allow boys to cross over into their category, that excludes girls, that steals opportunities away from them. It does jeopardize their safety because girls are more likely to get injured when they compete against boys. We know this. That's why we have categories. I don't think Caitlin Clark has given any thought to that. Not much. She's very much focused on basketball, and that's understandable. Whereas Sophie Cunningham, I think she's given it some thought. When she did the original ESPN article, when she said what she said initially, and she was like, wait a minute, of course girls' sports should be protected and they shouldn't, be in a position where they're competing against boys. Of course. That's all she was saying. And she's just being honest. She was just being honest. She wasn't saying, I'm not even going to get involved, or I'm going to straddle the fence, or I'm going to be woke. Whereas Caitlin Clark, she gave an answer that was, I'm not getting involved in this. She said herself, we're just focusing on basketball. We lost. We need to talk about that. You know, that's what we need to be focusing on, especially in our locker room when we're talking about strategy. That's all we're talking about. And I wouldn't say Caitlin's answer was woke. She could have said, trans women are women and we don't want to exclude anybody. You know, she could have said something like that, but she didn't. She just said, that's not my focus. Leave it to the sporting bodies. Leave it to the sporting bodies. I'm just here to play basketball. That's essentially what she said. And her coach, her woke coach, was sitting right next to her. You know, she didn't want to go there. So is it disappointing? Absolutely. And if you think, you know, if you're expecting Caitlin Clark to weigh into these matters, you're going to be disappointed. That's it. You're just going to have to accept that. You're going to be disappointed. It was a pleasant surprise when Sophie Cunningham did. I don't have any expectations of these people. I really don't. Caitlin Clark, admittedly, I weren't impressed with her when she did that whole white privilege thing. But she didn't have to impress me. I wasn't impressed. And that's when I realized you don't have expectations of these people. They're going to do what they believe is right for what they want to achieve for their career. And that's it. And I think for Caitlin Clark, it's more about her performance on the court, not about weighing into these matters and saying the right thing or, you know, not saying the wrong thing. She doesn't even want to go there. So you're going to be disappointed if you expect her to weigh into these matters. It's not going to happen anytime soon, at least anyway. Maybe, you know, in the future, people do change. But from what I've heard about her, I just don't think she thinks that deeply into these things. I really don't. So if you're a fan of hers, you know, just appreciate the performance on the court. Just appreciate that. Don't expect anything else.
Hi, the WTA recently announced that, you know, the players will take a one-time gender test. How do you feel about that? The first pro league to go in that direction.
I think it's really important to keep the fairness in our tour, and it's obvious that biologically, right, the men are way stronger than women, so I feel like it would be not really fair for the women to compete against biological men. So I believe it took them a little while to make this decision, and I support it. But for me, I'm focusing on myself, on my goals, you know, whatever it takes. If they want to test us all, I'm happy to do that. It's pretty fair, and let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Matt Walsh, on the other hand, he said Caitlin Clark might be the biggest coward in the history of sports. She refuses to say anything about the anti-white racism she has been subjected to since coming into the league. She punts on the trans question, which is the easiest question you could ever be asked. No spine. Megyn Kelly simply said, coward, which I think is rich coming from her, but that's another video. Check out my members' videos if you want to know what my thoughts are on all of that. Absolute moron, idiot. To call Caitlin a coward for this answer. First of all, you don't even know how she feels on this issue. And more importantly, she doesn't owe it to you or anybody else to be your political talking point. She just wants to play ball. Total coward, cheap shot. To call her a coward for not being your puppet. 100% Dave, I find it hilarious that pundits want athletes to speak up when it's talking points they agree with. When it's not, though, they should shut up and dribble. All these political talking heads are so opportunistic. The women who rallied outside this game in Minnesota, my goodness, they were harassed, threatened. These are not the calm individuals, no. They're anything but those things. So thankfully, security stepped in, and this is over people saying that women should have their own sports and shouldn't be forced to compete against men. This is what's getting people so upset. And my theory is that a lot of these coaches wouldn't even mind having a male athlete on their team because they want to win, not just because of their ideology, but because they know the advantages. And if they can squeeze a male player onto their team, they wouldn't have a problem with that.
Jesse, I think this is really about some of those coaches wanting players with a biological advantage on their teams so they have a higher winning percentage. I think that's why you're seeing, the owner of the Seattle.
What did you think of Caitlin Clark's answer? Do you think she shouldn't be asked these questions and should just be left alone to play basketball? She's not going to be a Sophie Cunningham.
My concern is that Caitlin Clark is being kind of a follower. Yep. She is letting her fans dictate what she does. Leaders don't let their fans dictate what they do. They stand up and they lead. And I would encourage her to be a leader.
Or do you think she should have stood up for Sophie Cunningham and said, yeah, I agree with Sophie, and, taken the consequences? So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video. And a huge thanks to all of those who have hyped my videos. It is greatly appreciated.